What's the difference between tasting coffee and just drinking it? Today, I'm going to show you how to taste coffee like a pro. Let's talk about how to taste coffee correctly. And I'll also cover cupping coffee, what it is, how to do it, and why. When I was brand new to tasting coffee, the notes on the bags were honestly pretty confusing. This is because some companies actually add flavoring to whole bean coffee. So when I saw notes on a specialty coffee bag, that's what I actually thought was happening at first. And then when I tried tasting it myself, I couldn't pick out notes like berry, hazelnut, or chocolate like the bag said. It honestly just tasted like coffee. Let's talk about what those tasting notes actually mean. The flavor notes you see on coffee bags serve as descriptors for naturally occurring flavors in the coffee itself. You'll see descriptors like caramel, nutty, chocolatey, or even something more specific like Bosc pear or dried fruit. These are not additives like you might see in a craft beer or a loose tea blend. There is no sugar, chocolate, or fruit that has been added during the roasting process. But rather, these notes come from the roaster's experience of that coffee. What's nice about these tasting notes is that they give you an expectation of the coffee you're about to drink. So, for example, if you don't like acidic coffee roasts, then seeing notes like berry or citrus will let you know that the coffee may have some acidic-like properties. Taste is subjective, so the tasting notes aren't a hard and fast rule, but they do provide helpful guidance in finding which coffees that you are drawn to. Simply put, the tasting notes are the association of tastes you experience. The best part about learning how to taste coffee is that you're essentially training your taste buds to learn how to pick up certain tasting notes. This helps you to taste notes in coffee, but also in a wide range of other foods and beverages. This skill is super transferable. You'll notice it in wine, sauces, soups, and so on. And back to coffee. You can even get started at home with just a pot of drip coffee. Let's start with the basics. There are a lot of different sensory elements that play into tasting. First is sight. We're checking to see how dark or light the coffee is for roast indicators, and then I like to reflect on opacity. Is it something that I can see through more like a tea, or does it completely block all the light? Next is smell. Smell is really important because sometimes you pick up more aromatics with your nose than with your tongue. I've found that a lot of people will actually smell the notes before they can actually identify the taste. So when you approach a cup of coffee, after you've taken a good look at it, start by inhaling the aromas. What comes to mind first? Some common notes are nutty, smoky, or roasty. And in some specialty roasts, you might detect some more unique flavors, like blueberries or even a fresh bready smell, kind of like pastries. After sight and smell, then it's time to taste. Take a small sip to first assess the temperature of the brew. If the coffee is too hot, or for iced coffee lovers, too cold, it's harder to pick up flavor notes. A good coffee should taste good at room temperature, which is also when the flavor notes will stick out the most. That goes for other things too. Wine, beer, food, you name it. Our bodies detect flavor more easily when the temperature is neutral or just in general closer to body temperature. That's not to say that room temperature is always the most enjoyable, but it is when it's easiest to sense those details. Now it's time to take another sip and be mindful about what's happening. When and where do you start to taste the coffee? Do the flavors hit you immediately, or do they linger after you've swallowed? Do the flavors stick around, or do they fade quickly? Keep practicing this routine when you taste. Over time, your brain gets better at detecting those minute flavors and aromas. And at the end of the day, tasting coffee starts with two things: mindfulness and practice. Now I want to walk you through how I taste coffee using the steps that I just described. I've brewed up a pot of our Camber Dialed In on the Fellow 8N. Starting off with our first assessment, we're going to just take a look at the coffee in general. It has a kind of lighter yellower tone to it, which is implying we're somewhere in a medium roast profile. It's also lightly opaque. Light is passing through it, That's gonna be down to our brew method. Because I'm using a paper filter with a flat bottom, I don't expect to see all the way through, so I'm expecting a little bit of a richer texture out of this coffee. Now we're gonna try a smell. This is such a fun coffee. Immediately on the smell, there's a kind of sense of a brown sugar profile, a little bit of like a stone fruit sweetness, kind of plum or cherry if I were to throw that there, and a touch of milk chocolate as an overarching through line. Up next, I'm gonna taste it. Now, on that first sip, all I'm getting is heat. This is a fresh cup of coffee. There's a nice sweetness to it that I'm really enjoying. So I'm gonna demonstrate a little bit more of a formal technique where I'm going to slurp the coffee. In slurping it, it's going to aspirate the coffee and spray it across my entire tasting palette, so I'll be able to sense all the different flavor profiles. And it's also going to cool it down so that way I can perceive it a little bit better. It's really, really leaning into that stone fruit note. I'm gonna call it like a black plum, super sweet and round. And then there's this medium spike of acidity that's kind of like just making the coffee very vibrant and like interesting to drink. This is supported by an aftertaste of like this awesome sort of milk chocolate, very complex and solid. I really like this coffee as a drip, and it's also indicating to me that this would be a spectacular shot of espresso. And sorry, I get really excited about coffee and I might have run away with it. Let's check in on our bag to see what the roaster thought their coffee would be. It calls out cherry, baking spices, and plum. So I was right on it with the plum, and sometimes even these notes can feel like a lot to try and take in. When I'm working with new tasters in my class, I'll often ask if there is a color association that comes to mind, or if there's a memory or a story that comes to mind for the experience of that coffee. Our sense of smell and taste are very closely linked to memory, so oftentimes if a certain flavor profile beyond "this tastes like coffee" is eluding you, there's another feeling of something else that will appear. Being able to acknowledge that and stay mindful will eventually lead you down the road to flavor profiles. Now, let's get into a very exciting topic that we get a lot of questions on, which is cupping coffee. First, we need to explore what cupping coffee is, and then we can get into the why and how. Cupping coffee is the professional sensory assessment to judge a coffee's overall quality. It does its best to provide objective measurements to the subjective tasting experience. Think of it like a coffee grading system. It's essentially a universal way for us to assess coffee by providing standard tasting characteristics. So now that we know what cupping coffee is, why is it important? For coffee professionals, cupping provides a way to talk about a coffee's character. It also helps make decisions on how to roast, blend, prepare, and even how much to pay for a given coffee. At home, I like to cup coffee so I can anticipate my recipe a little more and determine how I want to brew that coffee. It's incredibly practical and it reduces coffee waste at home. While I've talked about it a lot, I want to provide a visual of what the process looks like. To do a really basic cupping, what you need is roasted coffee, a grinder, a kettle, bowl or small cup, and a couple of spoons. Essentially talking through this process, cupping uses very standard rules. We put 10 grams of medium ground coffee into a bowl. We brew with water that's around 205 degrees at about a 1:18 ratio. The goal of this is to make every coffee present as similarly as we can. And we're gonna allow this to steep for about 4 minutes, and then we're going to taste. Now that 4 minutes have passed, we're gonna be able to assess the coffee. So we'll take one of our spoons and push the coffee back, get a good feel for the smell and the aroma. Use our second spoon to remove the grounds and all the grounds off the spoon, and then we can get a taste. really objective, consistent way to brew coffee. And I will say, this is a really fast look at this process. If this is something that you'd like to see more about and get a really detailed step-by-step process alongside the Specialty Coffee Association's Coffee Value Assessment cupping form, let us know in the comments and we'll put that video together. In summary, the only way to get really good at tasting coffee is by practicing. I also encourage tasting coffee with others to share your perspective and hear their reflections as well. Coffee is truly communal, and that's something that I really, really love about it. So if you've never had the opportunity to taste coffee with a friend, I highly recommend it. So next time you're out at a coffee shop with a friend, you can try this out. Start off with how the coffee looks, smells, and then finally the taste. All three of those elements combined will give you the best sensory experience for tasting coffee. By the way, I teach coffee classes here at our retail store in Washington State. So if you're local, head over to the description to find the link to our class schedule. I'd love to meet you and hear your thoughts on tasting coffee.